to push the record button. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining PEER's October meeting. For those of you who are here for the first time, we welcome you. Just a little bit of background on who PEER is. PEER stands for Progressive East End Reformers, and we are a multi-issue grassroots organization committed to advocating for issues that impact all Long Islanders, including social justice issues, housing issues, healthcare, and of course the environment. And the way that we do this is primarily through electoral politics and activist issue-oriented engagement with the public. PEER is a chapter of the New York Progressive Action Network, known as NYPAN. NYPAN is a statewide organization with over 35 different groups, chapters like ourselves or affiliates, and they advocate on the state level for legislation in Albany. And also they endorse candidates running to hopefully make changes in Albany and throughout in the country. So PEER is also affiliated with Our Revolution and Indivisible. So tonight our topic is climate. Clearly we are all alarmed at the acceleration of the destabilization of the Earth's climate. It seems every year there's a 100-year storm from historic rainfalls, which we've recently just experienced, to widespread fires. This summer, when you looked at a map of the US in the western part of the country, it was all red from the different fires that were going on there. But this isn't new, right? It's been a clear and present danger through pretty much all of our adult lives. So what can we do about it? We've asked 3 different climate activists here on Long Island to join us to discuss that. And so tonight we're going to have with us Monique Fitzgerald, who is an organizer with the Long Island Progressive Coalition. Long Island Progressive Coalition is a member of the steering committee of New York Renews, which is a wonderful organization of which PEER is a participant. Also joining Monique will be John Andrews with the Citizens Climate Lobby. He's with the Long Island East chapter. They are working on carbon fee and dividends. And Francesca Rheannon is with us, and she heads the Peconic region chapter of the Climate Reality Project, a global enterprise that was begun by Al Gore. So what can you expect tonight? Tonight, we're going to have a moderated forum with these 3 individuals. And after the moderated forum is over, you'll be able to ask questions to the panelists, and Julie Sheehan will call on you. And what we ask you to do is to just drop in the chat the fact that you have a question and maybe the topic that it is, so Julie can kind of guide us through that. Okay, so I guess what we'll do is we're going to start with each of the individuals giving us a brief background, well, introducing themselves, their organization, brief background on the successes as it relates to climate, and what current actions or legislation they are advocating for. So I'm going to ask Monique if she would be the first to start, and then we'll go to John and then Francesca. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Catherine, and thank you everyone for tuning in to this panel. Like Catherine said, my name is Monique Fitzgerald. I'm a climate justice organizer at Long Island Progressive Coalition. The Long Island Progressive Coalition has been around since 1979, so even predates my existence. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I would just like to acknowledge the land that I'm on right now. I am currently in Secretog land, which is occupied by Patchogue. I'm a member of the Settlecott Nation. So I would like to orient us in that way so that we acknowledge the First Nations in this talk. And as we go through climate, we want to center justice. And those are that is one of the ways that we can do that. So Long Island Progressive Coalition has been in existence for several decades. And basically, it's a member organization And we look to fight structural change through local, state, and national levels to attain racial justice, build communities to realize a just transition in this climate work, and to mobilize Long Islanders to take action. So that's a little bit about Long Island Progressive Coalition and what we're fighting for as a member, a coalition member of New York Renews, and being on the steering committee of New York Renews. We are fighting for the CCIA this year, trying to get that passed, which is a way to make the polluters who have been burdening us with all these toxins to actually pay, and to pay the communities that are on the front lines of injustice. So right now, that's what we're gearing up for, this fight to pass the CCIA. Previously, we've helped to pass the CLCPA, which is the Climate Leadership Protection Act, and that is the most aggressive climate justice bill that has been passed in this country. So we're very excited about that. We are in the implementation process of that bill. So the key thing there is that from past experiences, when we have, we've put bills forward, had bills passed, and then intention of the bill has not played out to the extent that folks wanted. So in this process, this is why we are keeping our eyes and ears and our whole focus on the implementation of the CLCPA to make sure that it does do what it was intended to do.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that, Monique. And I thank you for the land acknowledgement. And I'll just say I'm graced to live on Shinnecock land from where I am in Sag Harbor today. So we'll move on. We'll talk more about the CCIA going forward, but let's move on to John, please.
Okay. Thanks, Catherine, for inviting me. I'm John Andrews. I'm a co-leader of the Long Island East chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby. I've lived out here on the east end of Long Island since 1969 with my wife, Carol. For most of my working life, I did research on energy efficient buildings at Brookhaven Lab. I am a physicist and engineer and retired for the last, oh, God knows how many years, but at any rate, I'm also a member and past president of the Unitarian Universalist congregation on the Bridgehampton Turnpike. Turning to Citizens Climate Lobby, it was founded in 2007. I've been part of it since around 2014 or so. And it is laser focused. Its objective is to try to get a federal law in place that would put a price on carbon. And what that means, there's three aspects to it. The first is a fee that would be charged to producers and importers of fossil fuels in proportion to the carbon emissions that would be produced when those fuels are burned. And that fuel fee would start low and increase year by year so as not to suddenly give a sudden jolt to the economy. But if it were put in place in such a way that people knew it was going to increase by year, that would influence people's long-term decisions on energy efficient means of living their lives and electric utilities of using carbon-free forms of energy to produce electricity. So that's the first leg of the stool. The second leg of the stool is cashback, sometimes called the dividend. And the idea there is the federal government would collect the fees, but instead of keeping the money, would give back to the people in equal shares. And the point is that this would keep people who are relatively energy efficient whole or even ahead of the game. People who are in the lower income brackets would actually come out ahead because the dividends they got would be more than the increased cost of energy on their limited incomes. People who are quite wealthy would probably pay more, and so be it. And middle-class people who made an effort to be energy efficient would also come out ahead, according to studies that have been done. So that's the second leg of the stool. The third leg of the stool is a little bit in the weeds, but it's called the border adjustment. And economists have raised the point of saying, well, if we do this and other countries don't, that will give an advantage to industries in other countries who have a lower cost of energy than we do. So the border adjustment would put a special tariff on goods imported from countries that don't have this, but would not put the tariff on countries that do. And I'll just say in passing that some other countries that are planning to put this in place are planning to put tariffs like that against the United States unless we do it. So those are the three legs of the stool. Citizens Climate Lobby is laser focused on that effort. We don't pretend that that is the only thing of importance in climate or environment, but in terms of Citizens Climate Lobby's role, that's what we're laser focused on.
Thank you, John. Francesca, please.
Yeah, and it's great to see Monique, by the way, because I'm also a member of Long Islanders for Climate Justice, which is a project of the LIPC. So I'm Francesca Rheannon, she, her, and I live on Montauk land. And I recently became the chair of the Peconic chapter of the Climate Reality Project when the inimitable Kate Rogers stepped down to run for town board in East Hampton. The Climate Reality Project, as Catherine already indicated, came out of, was founded by Al Gore, and it actually came out of his great movie, the first one, Inconvenient Truth. It began as a training on the Inconvenient Truth slideshow, which is still continually evolving and adapting to current situations, and very much a part of the Climate Reality Leader training. But it's become much more than that. It's committed to recruiting, training, and mobilizing a critical mass of activists to change the world and to win the fight for a healthy climate and a future. It's a global effort that provides skills, campaigns, and really wonderful resources to push for aggressive climate action and high-level policies that will accelerate a just transition to clean energy. Our signature activist program, the Climate Reality Leadership Corps, has trained over 36,000 climate reality leaders worldwide since 2006. There are 10 branch offices in Australia, Brazil, Canada, Europe, India, Indonesia, Japan, Mexico, the Philippines, South Africa, a partnership in China, and 140 chapters across the US. One of those chapters is the Peconic region, New York chapter, which is actually going to be folded into a new Long Island-wide chapter, hopefully by the middle of next month, where we will have 3 co-chairs, one from Nassau County, one from Western Suffolk County, and then us here on the Peconic region. Our chapter began in 2019 with a group of just 5 people, and we have a lot more folks than that now, probably around 15 to 20. People who, are interested in moving the needle here on the East End. Since our inception, the chapter has achieved some important wins, including growing support for the South Fork Wind Farm. Kate Rogers was a leader in Win with Wind, which was founded to do that, and the WindWorks Long Island campaigns in support of offshore wind power. And that has been advanced. There's good news on that. In addition, many of our local members are involved with other climate efforts on the East End. Several of us are in the East Hampton Energy and Sustainability Town Advisory Committee, Drawdown East End, and other local climate organizations. We are part of a New York State coalition of chapters, which is part of New York Renews, by the way, and which currently has been doing a lot of work trying to get the Build Back Better to have robust climate legislation passed. We've been working a lot, our campaign we call Our Climate Moment. And as a coalition, we've done lobby visits with 13 congressional reps, including one that I rather reluctantly organized with Lee Zeldin. But we stressed the security angle of the climate crisis with him. Although we didn't meet with him, we met with his national security aide, because evidently he doesn't have an environmental assistant, environmental aide. And we've been running a really strong social media campaign in tandem with Our Climate Moment. We send out calls to action every week, sometimes more than once a week if issues come up. After hopefully the Build Back Better plan is resolved, we'll be pivoting to pushing meaningful action on climate in the state, in New York State, with several legislative efforts, particularly around electrification, including electrification of buildings, electrification of transportation, and electrification of landscaping equipment, which is more spewing of climate emissions than cars are. So, let's see, is there anything else? And we are currently in discussions about recruiting new leadership. We're welcome new leadership. We just had another training and gained 2 more members from our local region. And we are working on strengthening relationships with local environmental justice groups.
Terrific. Thank you, Francesca. And you answered to an extent the next question in terms of the conversation, which is, how familiar each of the organizations are with each other's works and what might be some of the key differences between them. So, John, I'm going to ask you if you could respond to that. Are you familiar with what LIPC and New York Renews and Francesca's group has been doing? And could you identify maybe some of the differences that you might be aware of, if you can? Thank you.
Sure. In general, yes. In detail, not always totally. I will say that because Citizens Climate Lobby has this single focus agenda of carbon pricing, we welcome sister organizations that have somewhat different focuses. I'd like to focus in particular on Drawdown, which I imagine most of you are familiar with. And Drawdown is a very creative organization that has highlighted a whole bunch of things that can be done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And where I think it fits in with Citizens Climate Lobby is that Drawdown highlights things that can be done. Citizens Climate Lobby is promoting what we think is the most effective way to make those things actually happen. I personally think, and I think that most people in Citizens Climate Lobby probably would agree, that simply a few of us deciding that we ourselves are going to be more environmentally aware, use less energy ourselves, is not going to cut it on a worldwide basis. There needs to be the incentives for everyone to participate. And we think the fundamental incentive has to be economic. That's not to say that other aspects, for example, greenhouse gases other than carbon, would not be covered by the carbon fee and dividend. And so agriculture in particular, with nitrous oxide and methane emissions, needs particular attention. And also there are situations where regulation can actually be quite efficient. Regulation of things that are produced en masse, minimum efficiency standards in the field I worked in for furnaces, boilers, air conditioners, and so forth, and ductwork are things that I've worked on most of my working life. And so I think there's a place for all of that, but Citizens Climate Lobby is focused on the way to get it done really started. But Citizens Climate Lobby does not pick winners and losers. Citizens Climate Lobby says we want to use market forces to determine how much of each of the things that Drawdown has pointed out will actually make it into the mix. And so I think there's a real synergy between Drawdown and Citizens Climate Lobby in that regard. I can't be quite as specific on some of the other groups that are doing work. I did hear Francesca mention offshore wind, and certainly what Citizens Climate Lobby is promoting would promote offshore wind. I personally am very much for offshore wind, but Citizens Climate Lobby does not pick winners and losers. Citizens Climate Lobby is for stuff. It's not against stuff.
Well, I should just say that we also focus on things that will work. I don't think there's a silver bullet when it comes to climate. As we see, we're going to have to use everything in the book, everything possible,
Right.
from a climate bank to clean energy standards to carbon taxing, which so far has not been able to be passed in this country, but is critically important, I agree. We need to build the political will. We need to do the
We're
education.
going to get to that. We're going to get to that. If you,
I'm just saying, it's
thank
not
you.
a silver bullet.
Yeah, no, understood. Absolutely. Monique, from your perspective, and first of all, I just would like to give a big shout out to LIPC because they have been on the ground for decades, really trying to build a progressive movement on Long Island in a very interwoven, intersectional way by linking all of the different topics together and showing, how much climate is really a social justice issue. And other aspects of how we have a healthier island with healthier citizens. So Monique, I don't know if you're familiar with what John and Francesca, obviously you and Francesca have worked together on another group. I just wondered if you see any key differences between what they're doing and what you are doing with the New York Renews and other efforts.
Yeah, basically everything that you said, I would second. And the fact that, John was mentioning that they are a single issue. And like you said, we are multi-issue, intersectional, we do intersectional work. So a lot of our work with New York Renews covers a lot of the social aspects as far as like justice with jobs and bringing jobs to people who are disenfranchised by the carceral system in New York. And also our work with solar, trying to bring justice in that arena where nonprofits and faith-based organizations are pretty much left out of the tax benefits of solar. So we've been working with those groups to make sure that even in solar, there is some justice components in there so that we do address the social aspects of climate work and to further climate justice.
Great, thank you. And I know just yesterday on social media, there was the announcement about the installation of the solar panels on I think it's the school on the Shinnecock Nation. Is that correct?
I believe so, but I am not totally familiar with that project, but that's something that Ryan's been working on for a long time and had its challenges through the pandemic, but he was able to pull through and help the Shinnecock realize that goal. So that was a good win for the Shinnecock and justice.
Indeed. And so, I think everyone who's listening has already heard that there's a number of really important efforts that have been, are underway, and there's been some successes. So the next question, and I'll start with Francesca on this because she started to get into it. I mean, how do you navigate the political obstacles that we are facing in addressing climate change? How can we effectively do that? And kind of a corollary question is, what groups or institutions or corporations are blocking our action? So that's a lot, but Francesca, if you want to maybe start, try to unpack that, that would be terrific.
Sure. I mean, first thing I have to say is Climate Reality is a 501c3, so we do not get involved in electoral campaigns, but we get very involved in legislative campaigns. We push, I think the way we navigate is that we push for broadly based coalitions that are organized around principles, not partisanship. So for example, in our Climate Moment campaign, we do not support natural gas, carbon capture and storage, or the fossil fuel industry subsidies in the Build Back Better plan. Instead, we're pushing for support for the Clean Energy Performance Program, which it seems is, thanks to Joe Manchin, is probably dead at this point, but we're going to have to do something because that was key to it. We're pushing for a climate bank, a civilian climate corps to engage the youth in climate action, infrastructure, electrification of transportation, a just transition, a 40% environmental justice provision, and a polluters pay action fund. So these are all things that, New Yorker News works on, other organizations are working on, and we work on them with them. Currently, Climate Reality Project supports any policy that can get us to 52% below 2005 levels of carbon emissions. But we know that we need way further reductions beyond this point. And so this is the easy part, but so far we're failing on the easy part. So talk about, the barriers in the way. I think there are a couple of things. One is, of course, education is key because legislation is not going to get us where we're going. It's not even going to happen the way we need it to happen unless we build that political will at the grassroots. So there is a key education component of the Climate Reality Project to overcome the barrier of, the power of the fossil fuel lobby, as I call them. But I also think that especially in New York State, there is so much that we can do to provide national leadership, if not international leadership. California has been out there, the building electrification stuff, they already passed a law on that. We can do that here too. Our CLCPA was groundbreaking legislation, but we have not been able to implement it yet. So it's critical that we fund it with making polluters pay, fund that CLCPA. So I think, working on the state level, when the national level is being stymied by the gridlock in Washington, I think it's going to be really critical, not just our state, every state, but our state's going to be super important on that. And I also want to point out on the state level, the failure of the New York Assembly. I mean, here's the obstacles. I mean, we have a supermajority in the New York State legislature, and there was so much great environmental legislation last year that did not even make it, was not even considered by the Assembly's Environmental Conservation Committee. So for a supermajority, they didn't act like it, and we really need to hold their feet to the fire and tell them that we need to act audaciously, and we don't have the time not to. And so I'm thinking we have to pay close attention to the legislative issues, and we really welcome the fact that other organizations can work on the actual electoral aspect of it. I mean, we lobby our legislators, and we lobby the politicians, but we can't endorse them.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. You just enumerated very succinctly a number of key issues that are required, coalition building, education, New York leadership at the state level. And I'd just like to point out, in terms of the failure of the assembly, that we have an opportunity with Skylar Johnston, who we had at Piers last month, meeting to elect a very progressive, really wonderful young gentleman in AD2, and we would be able to send somebody who'd be a true advocate for this legislation and others to Albany. Pierre early on met several times with Zeldin on climate issues, and they basically just listened and then went about their business. So that's why we need to get people in office who are actually going to advocate. So Monique, in your experience with New York Renews and other climate organizations that you have worked with, what do you see as the groups or the corporations who have been blocking LIPC and New York Renews actions? Do you have a window into that?
So the corporations, I mean, all of them, really. When you look at the CLCPA, there are these committees, several committees, like the CAC, which is the Climate Action Committee. And a lot of these committees that are in charge of implementation and coming up with the parameters of how this bill gets rolled out have a lot of representation from corporations. So they're at the table making decisions when it's not in their best interest. Like with CCIA, one of our things is to make polluters pay. But if you have people like the Winter Brothers of the world, who is a waste hauler, at the table talk on the transportation or environment, the waste committees, then you're not going to get the result that you really need to get. So it's just been a lot of pushing and pulling regarding making sure that enough people power is behind the implementation process of this bill and all bills that we're endorsing. But like Francesca said, we haven't endorsed anyone. We're not doing that as an organization anymore. We do have the capacity to do it. However, we have found that the people have been disappointing. They have not followed through on their promises and have not been those champions that we need. I know I've met with several different politicians and people who are in office in the assembly, and they still look to us to do a lot of the grunt work. And I feel as though, yes, our organizations need to be on the ground. This is what we do. And we need to build that community and that people power. However, we elect our officials to do the same thing. Just because you become an elected official does not mean that you stop championing the things that we need in our society. You're a citizen just as well as a politician or electoral candidate. So I don't understand why there's a barrier there with our electeds, but then it's also the fact that, like I was saying before, we're a multi-issue organization. So someone could be good or lukewarm on climate, but then they're not good on other social issues. So it becomes a real challenge to try to endorse any one candidate. And
to put it simply, the state of the planet is broken.
Yeah, so that's pretty much what I've been saying.
Thank you, Monique. And I mean, you bring up a really good point that the membership of the committees in Albany have been stacked with people with special interest, and we need to try to figure a way to turn that around. And I just also want to say that once we get Skylar Johnson in as AD2 rep, he will join Fred Thiel. We're fortunate enough on the South Fork to have a representative who is not only gives lip service to this legislation, but actively advocates for it. And John, just wondering, from your point of view, that your laser focus on the carbon tax, where are the obstacles that you perceive in terms of you're trying to get that passed?
I guess I would see three obstacles. One is obviously fossil fuel industry, but the coal industry in particular obviously is against anything like this because coal use is declining in America, and this would pretty much ring the death knell to the coal industry, and so obviously they are doing what they can to oppose it, and we see that happening in the news. A second is there seems to be a climate change denial industry out there that has a variety of motivations, political, economic, cultural, but there are a number of so-called think tanks that make a business of putting out misleading and false information about climate change in pretty much the way that the tobacco industry did about the impacts of cigarettes. The Heartland Institute in Chicago, for example, just to name one, or there's something called the Friends of Science in Calgary, and there are many others. And they put out things that sound good on the surface, but aren't. Just one example. Some years ago, I was watching, I forget what, you got a cute cat there. And this was a professor emeritus at MIT, which makes me cringe because I graduated from there. But he was saying, well, they can't predict weather 2 weeks in advance. How can they predict climate 2 decades in advance? Well, if he knew anything about science, he knew the answer. And the answer is, well, weather and climate are not the same thing. Climate is average weather. So if I go into a room of people and I look at them and I can gauge their ages and their general apparent degrees of health and fitness, I could make a pretty good guess on average how long they're going to live. But up at any particular individual, I can't predict how long that particular individual is going to live. So weather is like guessing what the particular individuals are going to do. Climate is like what the weather is going to do on average. And that's the answer. And it's a good answer, but they don't give you the answer. They just give you what they think is the showstopper. So that's number 2. And number 3, unfortunately, there are a lot of people, many of whom consider themselves progressive, that I've talked with, who I call environmental perfectionists. And if there's something that's proposed that has any negative environmental impact whatsoever, they're against it without considering, well, maybe that environmental impact is like this, but what it would replace has this huge environmental impact. Somehow, if there's something that is going to replace something else, unless it's perfect, they're against it. And some of it's NIMBYism, and like offshore wind is an example there's no such thing as absolutely clean energy. Solar panels require a lot of energy to produce. They produce a lot of toxic waste. Does that mean we shouldn't make solar panels? No, it means we have to deal with them in a responsible way. But if you're against something in particular, then you bring those things up. But since everything has some talking points against them, if we listen to all of those, then we'll absolutely do nothing, and we'll continue to burn coal and oil and natural gas. So those are the 3 obstacles that I see. And just in response to the question about CCL's involvement in politics, we do not endorse candidates. We do lobby. We have 2 lobby days a year where we go to Washington, and the organization sets up meetings with almost all members of Congress, and I've participated in some of these. And we go in not like a ton of bricks saying, "You idiot, what are you doing?" we have a somewhat softer approach. We try to find something they've done that we think is good, and we thank them for that. And then we try to push them in the right direction. That's been a tough slog, no question about it. But the whole feeling is that there's going to have to be not only Democrats, but at least some Republicans who come around to the idea that we're going to need to deal with this in a substantive way. And of course, the jury is out on that. All I'll say is there have been many other issues, whether it's racial discrimination, LGBTQ rights, and so forth, where years go by and nothing seems to happen. And all of a sudden there's a jump, and things don't get perfect, but they can move a lot in a short period of time. And I hope that climate will be something similar, that there'll be a tipping point in there. It won't get perfect, but maybe there'll be some movement that will really move the needle, and hopefully not too far in the future.
Catherine,
Thank you for that.
add something on?
No, actually, we're going to ask another question that'll.
No, I'm very short. Just to piggyback on what John said, that I think another really huge barrier is doomsdayism. And I urge everyone to read Michael Mann's new book, The New Climate War, because the fossil fuel industry is moving from denialism to doomism, because they know that if they promote that, people won't do anything. And it's working, because a lot of people I talk to say, just throw up their hands, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, there's a lot of, that's not new. There's been a lot of doomsday concern about climate because it's such a vast issue. But to piggyback also on what John was saying, let's move to the national level. And I'd also like to kind of say, in terms of the three issues that you brought up, John, I think that, climate denial and the money of the corporate interests are far greater threats to getting things done than progressives really striving to create a more perfect union, from my point of view. And I just want to bring into the room Pramila Jayapal, who of course leads the Progressive Caucus in Washington, and she's very dedicated to passing the Build Back Better Act. And she's gone on record saying that it's going to pass. And I think that she's really working very hard to try to figure out how to thread that needle. So on the national level, I wonder, and maybe we'll start, Francesca, with you, if you could, you've talked about this a little bit already, but maybe bring just into focus the Build Back Better plan and what's in that, as you now know it, that your groups are in favor of, and maybe what's not in there that you'd like to see in there.
Well, I can certainly talk about what we're in favor of. Unfortunately, I can't really tell you what's in it, since the mentioned weapon of mass destruction was employed on the Clean Energy Performance Program, which, as I mentioned before, was absolutely key. It would have been the nation's first ever federal policy aimed at significantly reducing emissions from the power sector, and it could have reached 82% reduction from 2005 levels by 2030, 9 years. We are going to have to make that up somehow, because that's the level we need if we are going to survive, just literally survive. So it's going to be a lot harder. We're still, of course, things like the climate bank, it's a climate infrastructure bank, are important and are in there. But I personally, and I don't know what climate reality takes on this. I mean, basically the situation is so fluid that we've just been playing catch up all the time. But I think Pramila Jayapal and others in the Progressive Caucus have been talking about spreading the money over 5 years instead of 10 years, which I think would be a solution in a way, because we need, it's always more effective to have a lot of money at the front end, to front load it, because then you set things in motion that can maybe then the market can take over, or, things can be renewed later on as the crisis is going to only get worse. So, and you asked, I don't know if you wanted me to say something about the Green New Deal, but I kind of wanted to make a point about that.
Please.
The Green New Deal, of course, is not a policy. It's a framework that incorporates justice, climate justice, basically, and economic justice and racial justice, all that into, and embeds it, centers it, because it is, study after study has shown that if you don't take care of the justice issue, you're not going to take care of the climate issue. Even on the most basic thing, which is that, people who can't afford, their next meal are not going to be able to afford to put solar panels on the roof. But the Green New Deal has really been toxified by the right. And I'm thinking more and more that since it's a framework, we need to find a name for that framework that emphasizes solidarity, because we're all in this together. And the right has been able to split us apart, that divide and conquer. And I really think that the environmental movement needs to find a way to build bridges on the environmental justice front and on the class front, to really build, maybe the notion is a solidarity economy, or it's a solidarity for a livable climate. But I think we need to be talking about that more in the context of our climate work, and try to find ways where we can cut the knees under from the right's ability to kind of adopt, like critical race theory. They just take on these things that are not easy to understand, and they take them over. And we really need to find a way to counter that.
Great, thank you. And so Monique, to you, in terms of the whole issue of the intersectionality of the Green New Deal, how does that incorporate it in New York Renews and the other efforts that you're involved in?
Well, like Francesca said, it's a framework that you have to take with you. Like, it has to be a part of you and not these policies. It has to be a part of the people that we are reaching out to, and it has to be our policy. And when we are building this critical mass of people, then we will be able to move the needles that we need to move in a just way if the people coming to the table or to talk about these policies are coming from a place of justice. So it really starts from what is our own policy and framework. So that's what I think we have to start with always. And like Francesca said, like the Build Back Better bill, and the needle keeps moving because the talks are just undergoing, and things are getting shaved, and for the most part, a lot of what is being chopped or looked to be chopped is the climate aspect. So the progressives in the Progressive Caucus has a lot of work to do to hold the line. And I mean, they're doing a good job so far of keeping things the way that they are, the status quo of the 3.5. But obviously they are conceding that is going to change. But like Francesca said, if we front load the money and we kind of chop down the years, we can possibly do some of this work ongoing and keep it open. That once we open it up, that the transformation has already started to occur, and then we can continue it. But it won't continue if we don't change ourselves.
So true. I mean, you have to lead with your values, and everything springs from that. Before we leave the national level, John, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the specific legislation that you're advocating for, so that we all know if there's a particular bill or bills to keep an eye on.
Sure. There's a bill in the House of Representatives called the Energy Innovation Act and HR 763. It basically lays out a plan for a carbon fee nationally and a carbon cashback provision and the border adjustment that I mentioned before. And the bill has been co-endorsed by a whole lot of members of Congress. Unfortunately, all of them, or maybe all but one, are Democrats, and CCL has been trying very hard to at least get a few Republicans on board, but in the current situation, that's very difficult. It's worse than it was a few years ago. A few years ago, there was something called the Climate Solutions Caucus that had equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats. And there was a time when I felt very optimistic about that, but then it turned out really that it really didn't do anything. And so that was unfortunate. In terms of just addressing climate justice in particular, I want to point out that the dividend going in equal shares to all Americans would result in a massive income redistribution from the wealthy to the less well-off, simply because the least among us would get the same rebate that Elon Musk gets. And so it would basically shift income from those who are better off to those who are less well off. That is fairly obvious. And it probably is one of the reasons why conservatives are reluctant to support it, even though from someone who's a real conservative, if a real conservative says, I recognize that climate change is real, humans are causing it, and we need to do something about it, that a plan that uses market forces and only regulations as a secondary thing would be far preferable to something that relies heavily on regulations. And yet that doesn't seem to, it does not seem to have had the traction. And in our current environment, I can kind of see why. But on the other hand, there are people who think that anything having to do with market forces is sort of giving in to the polluters. Why should we let people pay to pollute is one of the things that some people say. And my answer to that is we need to do what works. And if we can't get carbon pricing through, if something else comes through that isn't as good but is better than nothing, I'm all for it. But I've been active in CCL simply because I think that liberal economists, conservative economists all agree that carbon pricing is the most efficient and effective way to go, with regulation as a backup for those situations where it can be effective. And non-carbon gases, situations where market forces don't do the job, such as builders build houses and put in the cheapest equipment they can get by with so they can win on price. And then the homeowner is left with the high energy bills. Things like furnaces and boilers and automobiles that are produced en masse, regulations are very much in order. But the centerpiece remains for the whole economy, the carbon price. And not only would that shift the economy into energy efficiency and low carbon energy, it would also provide innovators in our private sector with the incentive to develop the technologies that would benefit from this. That is something that kind of gets dropped off. That's at least as important as the direct economic effect.
Great. Thank you, John. I just want to just remind everybody that if you have questions, we ask you to drop them in the chat, and that after the moderated panel is concluded, Julie Sheen will be calling on the people to ask the questions. And just a comment regarding, the reality is we live in a world where the Republican Party is unfortunately acting more like a cult than a group of conservatives. And I don't say that
That's true.
To never to be able to get one vote, it shows that they're not really acting rationally. But anyway, let's pivot to to go to one of Francesca's earlier suggestions, work on the state level. So let's talk about New York State, and let's talk about the current governor and the governor's race in 2022. And so I'm going to ask Monique to respond to this first. What do you know about the governor's current position, and what role do you think the CCIA and passing that will play in the upcoming governor's race?
That's a great question. I know very little about Governor Hochul's stance. We have reached out as a coalition and written a letter to her office just to ensure that she has this on her radar. We're planning mobilizations to her office, things like that. So we have our strategy on how we're going to demand that our legislators and the governor in particular moves on the CCIA in the manner that we want to get it passed this year. But her particular stance on it, I don't have that great insight on that. And what was the other thing that you were asking?
Just about what role that legislation should play in the upcoming race for governor, and I guess in particular in the primary, because it looks like there will be a progressive challenging Kathy Hochul.
Mm-hmm. Well, we want to push all the candidates that are looking to run to understand the necessity and the need to prioritize the CCIA. So that is basically what our strategy is, but we want to get this passed this year. So a lot of that work is being done right now to make sure that it does get passed for this this legislative session. So this upcoming legislative session. So we have a lot of work to do. We don't have anything nailed down, particularly as far as what side she's leaning on, or that type of thing. But it's just lobbying and building that people power to bring people out and let the legislators know and the governor know in particular that this needs to get done. So that is basically our strategy that we're working through. We did get thrown that curveball that she is now our governor. Whereas, we didn't have her previously to this, so we had to kind of switch up what we were doing to adjust to that. But right now we are just in the adjusting stage and just planning these mobilizations.
Great. No, thanks for that. And I note that November 13 is a day of action for CCIA. Will there be a Long Island action? Do you know?
No, there are 3 mobilizations for that day of action. The plan was to keep it to a small number of actions so that we can get a large turnout. So we're looking to have at least 2,000 people at the rallies. In New York City, we are going to meet at Times Square, and we're going to march to Hochul's office from there and have a demonstration followed by a press conference. So the idea is to move people into one regional area and have a large, impactful day of action.
Terrific. So heads up, everybody, November 13, New York City, Times Square. What time, do you know it yet?
Yes, 12 o'clock is when we're going to be meeting.
Okay, Great.
Yeah.
I did read recently, and I guess the Albany Times, that the governor has, while really stressing the importance of climate action, has not come out in support of the CCIA, but that's why we need all of us in Times Square on the 13th to try to help her on that. So Francesca, how about your thoughts regarding the governor's race, regarding the governor around CCIA and other climate issues?
Sure. I have to say, we at Climate Reality, the New York State Coalition of Chapters, has been trying to reach out to her, and so far have gotten no response either, which is interesting. The CCIA, I think we need to do some thinking about the CCIA, I guess. Because it's not just the governor. There seems to be very little support for it right now in the legislature. And we do need to get it passed. So we may need to be open to finding finding out kind of what's wrong, because there was more support before it kind of actually came to the table. And from what I understand, I just think it's gonna be a work in progress. It's gonna have to be a work in progress to some degree. Again, without compromising on the critical, points of it. We were caught flat-footed, I think, as a movement in New York State by the huge opposition, the way the polluters who we want to make pay for this stuff, how they turned it around. They just focus on the gas tax. It's going to raise your gas prices. And I don't think we had much of an answer for that. And I think we really have to do a lot of work on how are we going to make the ordinary New Yorker understand that this is actually going to be in their benefit, is going to be cost effective, even in the short run, and certainly in the medium and to the long run. So we have to do a huge kind of campaign to counter their very effective campaign against us. And so, going out and doing the kinds of actions that Monique spoke about is really important, but also I think we're going to have to do some work to figure out a message that is going to build support for it among ordinary New Yorkers. Otherwise, they're kind of going to do the same thing again. Of course, pushing electric vehicles, maybe it's just part of a larger strategy. If we can push electrification in New York State, then a gas tax doesn't become as critical thing. On the other hand, that's such a long event horizon to that. It's going to take a long time to ramp up those electric vehicles. But it's all the different pieces working together. So, maybe if we can get people sold on electric vehicles and say, hey, if we can do this, the CCIA will help to pay for it. What will the CCIA do to help you pay to cheapen your electricity bill? Because if people electrify, their bills are going to go down. I mean, my electric bill is $12 a month. I have solar panels on the roof. That's my hookup fee to the grid. So people don't know that aspect of it. And I think we really need to focus on that kind of public information campaign.
So sorry to interrupt here, but there's a question from the chat that really just fits with the question from who was it? Oh, it was from Ann Davison about why is the New York State Assembly so reluctant to act on climate change? And just to make sure I'm getting this right, it sounds like from your analysis that there's not the popular will to combat the sort of corporate pressure that Assembly people are facing.
Yeah, and this is like the supermajority, Democratic majority that, right. It's like, I think that is part of it. I think that is a big part of it. Of course, COVID is part of it too. I mean, there were a lot of distractions, but it's not acceptable. So, you know, we don't have the time. We're running out of time if we have not already run out of time. And this is just not negotiable. And we have to let them know that.
Thank you. You know, I just want to bring into the room the what I've heard recently, which is that the organization that worked on Ione last year, Invest in Our New York campaign, is taking on CCIA this legislative session. And I'm going to ask Jerry Maslanka, who's part of our organizing committee, if she knows anything more about that, because has been involved with that. Because that group's energy behind it could do what Francesca, you were suggesting should be done, which I agree would be terrific. Jerry, do you know anything about that?
Oh, unfortunately, I cannot contribute anything that would be helpful at this point, except that they are going to, you know, take a part and help to push that and figure out a strategy, et cetera. But yeah, I can't offer anything more than that at this stage.
Okay.
I wish.
Thank you. I just, knowing that they wanted to pivot to CCIA, I think is positive for us going forward. And so we'll see, and we'll hope that does happen. One other state level question, which is pertinent because early voting has started, Proposition 2, which is on the ballot. Monique, are you involved with that? And if so, if you could maybe explain a little bit about that, and if there's any position that LIPC or any of the other organizations are advocating for.
Yes, this is a campaign that we're not really involved with, only just in support of. So we are asking or promoting that people vote yes to clean water on that bill. But that's pretty much all I have knowledge about that bill, other than the fact that we all need and deserve as a right clean water, and the fact that that's even negotiating or to be negotiated is terribly troubling.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you. So let's wrap up with the final moderated question, which is, you know, given the urgency which we've all discussed throughout this forum of the situation, how can we keep people from being overwhelmed, like what Francesca indicated earlier, and move them into action? Just like to hear from each of you. Maybe we'll start with John, if you have any reaction or comments to that.
Well, people I know are overwhelmed, and it's best to recognize that, and I don't have any wonderful answers to that, other than to say the following: that some people say, well, the train has left the station, we can't do anything anymore, it doesn't matter, we're doomed. And on the other hand, you know, there's people who say, oh, it's a non-problem, it's a fake, et cetera, et cetera. And what I tell people who are expressing being overwhelmed is that the longer it takes to get action, the more critical each amount of time that we can hasten the action becomes. And my analogy is something that I actually experienced when I was in college. I went home to visit my parents, and was late in the evening, in the middle of the night, I got the munchies, and I went downstairs and in their house and to hit the refrigerator, and the kitchen wastebasket was on fire. And I grabbed some water from the sink and dumped it and put the fire out, and the wall was scorched, but nothing more. Had I been 3 minutes later, the whole kitchen probably would have been on fire. Had I been 6 minutes later, the whole house might have been on fire. And the point is, the difference between my mother dumping cigarette ashes, which is what she admitted doing in the in the kitchen wastebasket, all of the hours between when she did that and when the fire started, it really wouldn't have mattered if I had gone and seen, oh, there's some ashes in there. But once the fire starts, the more you wait, the more it matters to hasten the time when we actually do something. And the only thing is, of course, if the house were totally engulfed in flames, well, then it wouldn't matter anymore. But I have to tell people, I don't think we're to that stage yet. I certainly hope not. And so rather than being discouraged by the time that it's taking to get action, to realize that the longer that it takes to get action, the more important it is to hasten the action when it finally arrives. That's the best I can offer.
Thank you. Thank you, John. And we're going to go to Francesca and then Monique, but I'm going to ask Monique in the meantime, if you have a link to the November 13 Times Square event that you could drop in the chat, that would be terrific. Some folks are asking for that. So Francesca, how do we help people from being overwhelmed and move them into being active? Oh, I think you're muted.
First of all, I can talk from personal experience. I've been feeling really overwhelmed. I've been feeling a lot of despair, so much so that I actually went to a therapist to talk about my despair over the climate. And being able to talk to somebody actually unleashed some of my flagging energy. And so in the last week, I mean, I just started a week ago. In the last week, I found, of course, action. To be active is the best antidote to despair, and it feeds on itself. So that's one thing I tell people, and it works. Another thing I tell people is, kind of informed by my Buddhist, my meditation practice, which is the principle of not knowing. We don't know what's going to happen. Something could happen to actually save us. We could win this thing. And the only way we're going to know that is if we're around to do it. And the only way we're going to be around to do it is if we work like heck in order and do everything that we can to make it happen. So let's do the virtuous circle instead of the despair circle. And then finally, I read an interesting article recently that said, there are people who say, oh, you can't, the environmental movement believes this for a long time. Oh, you can't scare people. If you scare people, you'll just make them desperate. Well, that's true. You can't just scare people, but you have to scare people, and then you have to give them the vision of what the world can be like that we're working for. The two go in tandem. If you don't get people scared about the very real crisis that we face, they're not that motivated. But if you don't give them the vision, then they don't have something to work for. So that's what I feel. Action, not knowing, and having a vision and having the knowledge of the gravity of the situation in tandem.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you. And Monique, thank you for dropping in the chat the link for the action on November 13.
Well, yes. I have an action too, I forgot to say. On October 29th, on Friday, there's 24 Hours of Reality, which is being put on by, is it okay if I tell people about this? Catherine, if I didn't interrupt. I'm going to put something in the chat for that. It is a social media campaign, which is worldwide. And there are a lot of fun things that you can do to participate. And so I'm going to go to the chat and I'm going to drop in the link to that. Let's see. Here we go. Where is the chat?
Okay, good. Please, please do. That sounds fun, and
there it is.
We appreciate that. Everybody copy that. And everyone knows they can copy the chat and take it and have it on their own computer when we're done. So you have all these wonderful links. So Monique, back to you. What do you feel is important to convey to people to help them from being overwhelmed and to encourage them to take some action?
Well, I would say that you have to acknowledge the fact that it's overwhelming. Like all the things that we have to fight against is overwhelming. So it's not unusual for people to feel overwhelmed. Like Francesca said, I know a lot of us in this room are feeling overwhelmed right now. So take a moment to take a breath. So I would also just encourage us to be more streamlined as organizers. There's a lot of busy work that sometimes get in the way of what we need to do, and kind of puts more on our plate than what really needs to be. And if there's any way to just take a moment when you're organizing an event or anything that you're organizing to do, just really understand, is this the most efficient way to do this? Is this necessary at this time? Or is there something that we could do in conjunction with something else to make sure that we are supporting our own mental and physical health? Then also we have to start getting to root causes. Climate change is not happening because of some, just mythical thing that's happened, that is going on. This is a structural issue. And if we don't get to the root of the structural issue of climate change, then we're going to continue to have it. We're going to continue to have these problems pop up time and time again. Well, maybe we'll put out, like John mentioned, a fire here, but then we have to put out another bigger fire maybe somewhere else. So we have to understand that. And then just like we were saying with environmental and climate justice, it's not a mystery that the people who are polluting are not the people who are on the front lines of pollution. It's not a mystery that every time that something is being rolled out, that the people that are feeling the effects are the people that, like in Hurricane Ida we just experienced, the people living in basement apartments. Why are people living in basement apartments? Why are the structures not in such a way that people can live and be in a situation where they're not at risk? So we have to start getting to these root causes and not missing that point. That point has to be eliminated or just dealt with. So if we don't deal with those things, we're going to continue to have this, and we're going to burn out. That's just going to be what it is. We're never going to finish the job unless we start at the starting point.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing, for closing us off for the moderated panel with the so important issue of dealing with the root causes of what's happening with our climate. And we have to do that. And that dovetails with the importance of leading with our values and using that as the wellspring from where we can find the energy to act in a streamlined fashion. So I'm going to turn it over to, first of all, I want to thank you all, but I'm going to turn it over to Julie, who has been monitoring the chat, and we'll have some questions now. Julie, please.
Sure, yes. We have Lisa Katz. You had a question about PSEG and their crazy home battery policy. Why don't you unmute yourself and ask that?
Hi, the last name is Kiss. That's okay. So I have tried many times to get a home battery put into my house, but every time I speak with an installer or New York State, they tell me that basically it can only be used in emergency situations, meaning when the grid is down. I cannot utilize the energy that I produce using that battery or that I store to relieve the pressure on the grid, and they're telling me that California allows people to do this. And it seems like a wise decision to relieve a very, very, busy grid. But New York State just, I don't even know where to begin to someone at the state level said to me, well, you can just organize locally and try to change the policy. And I mean, all of you guys that we're listening to tonight are in that fight, but I can see how I don't even know where to begin with fighting that and changing that law. Okay, talk to Fred Thiel. I think I did call Fred Thiel's office, but nobody responded. So, maybe I just don't have the knack. But my point is, as a homeowner, it's frustrating to see the logic in something and just know that the basis of their decision is just money. They just don't want to lose money. I don't know. I really don't understand the method. I don't understand the mentality.
And you have solar panels, right?
Yes.
So maybe
and a
Francesca
geothermal system.
And
Yeah,
pardon
I
me?
mean,
And a
that is-
geothermal system.
And geothermal. So like doing all these things right as an individual, but dealing with a policy that can't sort of
Right.
absorb that information.
Exactly.
Lisa, I just want to thank you very much for bringing this personally to my attention. I mean, I haven't put the batteries in because I'm waiting for them to get cheaper and better. But I didn't know about this, and I think that this is something we really have to take up at the state level. And also perhaps, well, I don't know. I mean, there's a fight that Monique can talk about this, that LIPC is doing to make the LIPA, basically controlled by we the people. And there's other things that PSEG are doing too. I don't know how many of you have gotten this kind of notice about, this clean energy, sign up for clean energy. Well, it ain't that clean energy. It's fuel cells that are being created by hydrogen that are not being created by clean energy at this point. So this whole thing about PSEGLI and LIPA, I think, is a very important thing for us to do. And Monique, I don't know if you want to talk more about that campaign, because that would be part. I mean, if we had control over LIPA, we could change that policy. I think.
Yeah, Francesca, thank you. I know little about the public power campaign. However, we are very deep into that fight. So the only thing as an organizer that I know how to say is to organize. So when the state told you to organize, I would say that is a good thing to do. And it would be good to contact us at LIPC, because we have weekly meetings where we are discussing the strategy on how to democratize our power system. So those are the things that we need to hear from people. What are the things that are happening that need to change, that need to change now? So it would be good for us to connect, and I can link you into those discussions.
Awesome. I guess you can, Lisa Kiss, so sorry about your last name mangling. You could maybe put your email in the chat for Monique, or go on to LIPC. I think they have a volunteer, or not LIPC. And I think they have a volunteer form too, where maybe you could.
Excellent.
Yes. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
If I could just toss in.
Yeah.
In 2015, I headed up a small committee in our Unitarian congregation, and we got a 27 kilowatt solar panel system put on our meeting house, and it is connected to the grid, and and the grid basically serves as the battery. So when it produces more power than we need, it runs the meter backwards, and when it's nighttime or no sun out, then the meter runs forward. And over the course of a year, it produces as much electricity as we use. So in effect, the grid is the battery. Now, why they won't let you actually use your own battery, I'm not entirely sure. I should be a little bit more up on that than I am. But as long as they let you run the meter backward, I'm not sure that having your own battery is going to help you all that much in terms of your overall energy use. But if you want to go off grid, of course, that's another story. Then the battery is what you would use to skate through times when you don't have energy input. But at any rate, I just want to throw in the fact that under the regulations that exist now, you can use the grid as your battery. Now, if everybody goes solar, that might change, and then the battery thing will become critical. And hopefully by then batteries will be cheaper, and there'll be the political will to allow people to use the batteries for more than backup. But right now you can use the grid as backup. So don't be afraid to go solar.
Thank you. We had two other questions that are seemingly local, but like this one, maybe they're not. One was from Andy Klausner, who had to leave, which was about the airports and noise pollution issues with Gabruski and the East Hampton Airport. And then Jerry, you had a question about solar farms in Southampton town. Do you want to jump on and ask more specifically about that?
Well, as far as the solar, I think I read something where in Southampton town, they have rather recently approved like the first solar farm. I probably don't have all the facts straight, but I thought maybe someone could elaborate on that.
Yes, did you just, I was just writing a note about that. Because Tina Kern was talking about, I mean, this is an issue. If you have too many trees, you can't put solar on your roof. I mean, you can trim your trees sometimes. That's what I did. But nonetheless, a community solar is really the answer to that. And so what I was writing was,
I'm sorry, Francesca, but just as one case, they would not allow me to trim my trees.
oh, interesting.
A lot of trees.
Yeah, well, this is what, I mean, you're not the only one. This is going to be true for a whole lot of people. And this is why community solar is so critical. And the Southampton, I don't know a lot about it. I'll know a lot more next month because I'm producing an episode of Sustainable Long Island, which used to be Sustainable East End. It's a monthly radio program that I co-produce on WPKN. And I'll be talking with the Southampton Sustainability Committee, which is going forth on developing this community solar farm. Again, there are barriers in the way. This is part of their CCA, oh gosh, what does CCA stand for again? Community Choice Aggregation plans, which LIPA and PSEG have kind of like put dead in the water. But I think those plans are well underway. So if anyone who's interested should get in touch with the Southampton Sustainability Committee. There's Dieter, somebody help me out. I can email this to Catherine Soka, the contact information, and you can send it to everybody on the list.
Excellent, thank you. And Kevin Cosgrove, you had a question. Do you want to unmute and ask? Kevin? Oh, did he had his hand raised? He may have had.
He may have dropped off. Yeah, I think he's left the meeting.
Oh, all right. Okay, very good. So anyone else who wants to raise their hand or just unmute and chime in, that is it from our questions in the chat unless I missed someone.
Okay, while people are maybe creating a question, I'll just say that I dropped into the chat a little information about that solar farm. And Francesca, please drop in the chat a link to your podcast if there is one that you can do that. That would be great.
Catherine, may I say a few words?
Please.
Right. Yeah, you know, about the election, about the batteries and so forth, people still think that we have to buy. The biggest action they can take is dig into their savings and spend money on an electric car or buying batteries, or in some way deal with this on the supply side. And I think it's useful to remember that we're in this mess because we've been disregarding doing anything we can on the conservation side. Mm-hmm. And I would like to just put one little factoid out for people to keep in mind. And that is that if we take the United States and we compare it with other nations where good arguments can be made that our standard of living is comparable, such as Germany, France, Scandinavia, and Japan, where arguments can be made that their standard of living there even is higher than here. It's quite disturbing to realize that the energy consumption per capita in those areas is 1/3 of our consumption, which also helps on the waste stream side as well. But there are ways to get to attack this issue on the conservation side, and it's the cleanest, environmentally most effective, and the cheapest. And it's not that, again, it's a silver bullet, as was said earlier this evening. There is no one answer. We have to take a multi-pronged approach all the way around. But this is a very, very strong card, and it seems that no one is particularly interested in playing it. The final note is that it's grossly unfair that people who spend money on backup generators are allowed to use those when the power grid goes down. Mm-hmm. But if you want to have batteries, again, you're not allowed to run them. I inquired about this and was told that when the power goes down and you're feeding your battery, you turn your battery on, there's a possibility that you could electrocute a repair person who's up there trying to restore your branch of the grid, right? And why is that not true with people who have fossil fuel backup generators?
Yeah, in fact, the way those systems are supposed to work is they automatically switch so that they decouple from the grid. So that's really, whoever said that to you that's a red herring.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And again, but it does open a door to think about, the propane and the oil people who are selling these generators, are they just a lot more effective at lobbying than we are? Mm-hmm. But lastly, it's conservation that we can cut back on what we're doing. I noticed you're at home, Francesca, and you got your sweater on, your Jimmy Carter sweater or whatever. And I don't know what your thermostat is set at, but I'm sure it's not 70 degrees.
The heat is off.
There you go. Right.
And that's partly due to climate change, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's 65 degrees outside. So, but anyway, but it's all connected. Bill, thank you for raising the conservation aspect. I think especially for those of us who live on the East End and just see the egregious overuse of energy, we can definitely hope that there would be some way that could be curbed. Reduce, reuse, recycle. I remember back from maybe 10 or 20 years ago as a clarion call. But I think all the questions have been asked. I know we're over 8 o'clock, so I'm just going to bring us to a close. I guess I'll ask if each one of the panelists wants to just have a minute to make a last statement. Please do so, and then I have two announcements, quick announcements, and we'll be out of here. So John, we'll start with you. If you would like to say something, please do.
Yes. I think what we need to keep in mind is that there are a lot of examples in history where it seemed like nothing would happen. People were working very hard to get something to happen. It's decades went on and nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, something happened that made it possible for an advance, whether it's women getting the vote or any of the other things I may have mentioned in the past. There's things go along like this, and then all of a sudden there's a shift. That's in evolution, it's called punctuated equilibrium. Mm-hmm. And we can, and it's very hard to predict when that's going to happen. And so we just have to hope that that tipping point is nearer rather than farther. And but there's no guarantees.
Gotcha. The not knowing. Monique, how about you?
So yeah, I like that idea that John just put forward. Because you see that in every aspect. So it does make a great point. And you know, some of the people that we've been organizing with, especially on New York Renews and maybe in your worlds as well, like we've been fighting climate for decades, right? And so now we're at a point where it seems like there's something, I don't know what it is exactly yet, if it means that we're at the point where we actually are going to win. I say, let's do that. Let's just go ahead and win.
Love it. Love it. Francesca.
So probably characteristically, I have two last comments. One is, I think it's really important that we start talking to people who we don't normally talk to. I'm going to ask everyone here to think of the type of person who is the least person that you want to talk to about climate, and find a way to talk to them about climate, meeting them on the basis of stories and values. You know, we all want to have a safe, we all want to be safe, right? We all want our children to have a healthy life. Start there. Go to the fireman's, chicken dinner. Do some deep canvassing in a red neighborhood. Find a way. We have got to move this out and stop and make this no longer partisan. And then my final thing is I want to leave you with some good news. Michael Mann says, and now I've seen it in other scientific work, he's a globally known climate scientist who wrote that book I spoke about. If we stopped emissions now, the planet would get cooler. It would start getting cooler right away. For a long time we thought we baked in the emissions so much that it would continue to heat up. We're not going to stop sea level rise so quickly, but we are going to stop the heating. So we can do this. It's possible. We can win.
Wonderful note to end on. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, John. And I also will just echo that optimism, or if not optimism, that persistent positive attitude, and say that with the new governor, with the new legislative session, New York can really, really make a difference this year. And I believe if we all work together, we will go a long way towards making that happen. One way that you can continue to help us is if you enjoyed tonight and you're not yet a member of PEER, we welcome you to join the organization. I've just dropped in the chat how you can do that by either going online or sending a check to our secretary, for those of you who still do write checks. So please consider joining the organization. Our next meeting is going to be really a sit down and think about what we want to focus on going forward with 2022 just around the corner. Everyone's welcome to join us, whether you're a member or not. And also be sure to vote. Early voting has started. The election is next Tuesday. And again, I thank everybody. Have a great night. Keep up the good work for the good causes, for the planet and for, everybody, including the good creatures and the cats on Francesca and Julie's screen there. So thanks, everybody. Have a great, great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you.
You bet.
Stay safe in the storm.